wealth and jobs. This is according to Shaju's CEO, Dr. Julian Rowa, who believes that manufacturing holds the key in lifting the Kenyan economy that has been battered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight on the Business Insight, Regina Manyara interrogated Dr. Rowa's pre-budget expectations.
Good evening. You're watching Business Insight and I'm Regina Manyara. Now we're going to be focusing on matters of fiscal planning. Does Kenya have it right, or are there errors that we need to correct? To take us through this conversation is none other than Dr. Julian Rowa, CEO, Shaju. Thank you, sir, for your time. Now, we'll start from that point. Let's just give us your perspective or your take in regard to where we sit or stand in as far as the economy is concerned.
Different people will have different view on where the economy is at present. There are the optimists who will say that our infrastructural development is well thought in terms of the capabilities it gives the country for future growth and development, and they're entitled to that view. But there are those of us who will also argue that there would have been a better need to refocus our energies to something more substantive that is more direct in the implications of people's lives. So if you look at what Corona or COVID-19 has done, the question then becomes, should we change our focus, move away from macro level of economics to something a little bit micro, with a more direct interest in the area of SMEs. You and I know that SMEs are not in a very good place right now, and SMEs actually are the drivers of the economy. So if they're not doing well, if the business is shrinking, if the human resources that they employ are having to be redeployed or to be shed off, then we have a fundamental problem in our hands. So if you're to ask me, there are different schools of thought, but I would argue that we have a problem and we need to rethink or reimagine what we want to do with our economic plan.
Now, talking about focus and reimagining, we look at projections in terms of expenditure for the financial year 2020-2021.
Yeah.
Yes, we're looking at around 3 trillion, up from 2.9 trillion in the previous financial year.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, then, would take priority in our fiscal planning for the next financial year?
I think for me, the ambitious projects that have been laid out by the government, specifically if you look at the issues of infrastructural development, which have very heavy capex outlay, we may want to rethink whether investing in infrastructure at this point in time is a priority area. Mention has also been made, although that has gone quiet in recent months or years, about the agenda, Big Four agenda, where we are talking about universal healthcare, we are talking about nutrition, food security and nutrition, we are talking about manufacturing, and we're also talking about, there's a fourth one, housing, if I'm not wrong. If you look at those again, with the exception of manufacturing, and probably healthcare, because healthcare is important for driving the economy. I'm very, very worried, or I don't think that housing should be a priority area for us. Much as in the long run, definitely we will need to think about how people settlement is addressed. Now you've talked about expenditure, from 2.9 to 3 trillion. That means we need another 1 trillion to fund the budget. The question is, how do we fund
the budget? Before we even talk about the budget, you've said that for you, priority, affordable housing is not quite a priority. However, you give priority to matters of healthcare. What other sectors do you think the government needs to concentrate on in as far as fiscal planning is concerned?
I think manufacturing. Because within manufacturing, if there's a way you can spur manufacturing and create more production, under manufacturing you're creating wealth. So you're not really looking at sunk costs. You're looking at a cost that is incurred to incentivize production. So that for me would be a priority area for me. What else? When you think about the outlook of the fiscal planning, recurrent expenditure is becoming a big issue as well. We are spending so much money on paying people. whose productivity again still becomes a question for debate. Do we need to rationalize so that we can bring the cost of our recurrent expenditure down?
Kerry, as a taxman, has quite the role there.
Yeah.
We have been seeing over the last few years it has not met its target.
Yeah.
Will it, when it's crucial for government to rake in this revenue, do you think from where I sit it is going to meet its target this year?
I mean, we have to give it to the Commissioner General. I hope that is his title. At Kerry, he's really put up really detailed measures to expand his collection base. And I don't know about you, but I'm a beneficiary of so many texts reminding me about what I'm meant to do here, what I'm meant to do there, issues to do with land rates and rates. I mean, this constant reminder around that. And I remember a couple of times my KRA relationship manager has been in touch with me. This is something that had not happened before. So I think in terms of his strategy going forward, he is very, very, very clear. My only issue remains, we are probably still focusing on the same pool of people to collect when we should actually be thinking about expanding that bracket so that many people come in and then we are able to actually bake a bigger pie. I don't know to what extent he has been successful in putting that in place. Issues of digitization would also be very critical at this particular time if he was to be successful in collecting enough to be able to fund the budget. So I have a twofold response to that. One, with his level of aggression and very linear focus on what he intends to do, I have a feeling he may surprise us by way of probably exceeding, and this is hypothetical. But again, this has been slowed down by the recent ruling by Justice Odunga, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, suspending the 1% turnover tax.
Exactly. So then the question for me that arises is, did he see that coming? And if he saw that coming, did he assess that risk and put in mitigation measures so that of continuing with this strategic objective is not defeated. So I have a very good feeling about what the Commission is trying to do, and I have a very strong belief that he may actually end up achieving his target if all other players come on board. But it's a very delicate issue at the moment. Yeah.
Now, the issue of debt management.
We have a big problem. A very, very big problem. If you'll allow me to share with you some statistics.
Go ahead.
And allow me to quote as well. According to the 2021 budget policy statement, Kenya's debt in June 2020 stood at 7.06 trillion. That is equivalent to 65% of our GDP. IMF insists that our loan obligation must not go beyond 40% of GDP for developing countries. So that alone is an issue. Business Daily, I quote, this is Treasury report on post-COVID-19 economic recovery strategy, which stated that our debt actually stands at 8.41 trillion. Now remember, there was the 1 trillion that we need to raise.
The deficit.
Talking about a ceiling of 9 trillion, which is, I think, what we have revised it to. We don't have much headroom. The question then becomes, how do you intend to fund that or finance that deficit? We know that IMF has come to town. They'll definitely come with a very painful dosage for us to take.
Now, talking about dosage, we expect that LPG will no longer be zero rated and is going to attract a VAT of up to 16%. Then, how then is this going to affect the purchase power for Wanjiku, or rather impact on the cost of living?
Definitely, the cost of living is going to go up. The purchasing power is going to go down. What that does that then mean? That we have very little money. What's the right phrase to put it? There's very little money competing. There are so many competing demands for very little money. And then that begs the question, will we still be able to meet our other obligations? If the purchasing power is low, it simply means that we're not sparing or we're not consuming enough so that we can also accelerate or motivate production. So it's a very interesting cycle, and this is something that really needs to be thought through again. So just taxing people for the purposes of collecting does not really solve the problem.
Would now widening the tax bracket and bringing in the informal sector, given that, you know, this presence of the large and informal sector, you know, being untaxed, they're not within the tax bracket, then would it change the dynamics if indeed we...
I believe it would. I believe it would. But we have to be very sensitive with regard to what extent do we want to tax the informal sector space, so much so that we do not again kill the goose that lays the golden egg. But I think it's in everybody has an obligation. I mean, the service delivery being offered to you by government, you know, be it in health, be it roads, any kind of infrastructure, you are also enjoying just like any other Kenyan. So we are obligated to pay our taxes. But we have to be very clever and creative in how we subject this particular sector to taxation. We've talked about purchasing power. I mean, you don't want to tax them and strangulate their business at the same time. Let us project a country on an informal sector that also create jobs for others. If we're able to do that, then we're again widening the tax bracket. But it can only happen if we are creating wealth, and we must enable the informal sector to create wealth for themselves and for the country.
The COVID-19 disruption has heavily hit MSMEs, and one of the conversations around the private sector is for government to come up with an economic stimulus to support them through these businesses. Talking about that particular stimulus and targeting and looking at the MSMEs then, are banks ready to actually support MSMEs when it comes to this stimulus, especially with, you know, credit facilities? Are we ready?
First, I'll be the first one to confess that the much-hyped economic stimulus package that was announced sometimes last year to cushion MSMEs against COVID-19, there's been no trickle effect, at least none that I've felt. So the question then becomes, how was this product packaged and how was it designed to work? Is MSMEs feeling it? The few that I've had the privilege to interview tells me that they can't feel it. Now, to your question as to whether banks are prepared, my background is banking, and I will tell you without a shadow of doubt that our core business as banks is making money.
And as you make money, I also have a counter. Some 2 weeks back, we saw some banks coming out saying that they're not going to be giving their dividend payouts because of COVID-19 disruptions. But just how much money is enough for commercial banks?
Well, this has always been an issue of debate for me, and I've had to really think. I mean, are we being fair at the amount of interest that we levy on some of the loan facilities that we give out? The profits being made by banks, I mean, they're making mega bucks. I would call it abnormal profit, which simply means that if you cut, your profit margins by a certain whatever and reach a bigger space of people, you'll actually be participating more in catalyzing economic growth and development. But they have shareholders who have expectations. And what are they looking at? They're looking at the bottom line. So banks, by design, want to make as much as they could. Now, under COVID, and this is where the paradox is, under COVID, the question then becomes, if you don't support those businesses or the individuals that have borrowed from you, how sustainable is your business as a bank?
Bringing the question of non-performing loans that have been on an increase. What do we say about that?
It's a big mess. And I don't think banks have been imaginative enough or innovative enough to work around it. Reasons I say that, you're looking at CRB listing of about 14 million Kenyans. Now, if you're listed in CRB, it simply means that there's no room for you to borrow. But banks still need borrowers. So how do those dynamics work? I think we have to go back and rethink.
And as we are rethinking, then come in the fintechs, where Kenyans look at the statistics that we've had. Kenyans are now borrowing online, through their mobile platforms.
Interesting, yeah.
The death of the banking sector, but the rebirth of fintech. There's someone actually quoted that. But is it the solution?
Fintech further accelerates the problem, because what it simply does, it's just another channel of service delivery. But at the end of the day, they're still selling money. The question is, what are the policies or the principles that govern lending? so that it is prudent in the way that it is done. Otherwise, I see fintech is just another channel of distribution. So when you're looking at the 14 million Kenyans listed in CRB, I can promise you that a big chunk of this is coming from that, the digital space in financial lending. I mean, we're talking about 1.63 trillion in restructured loans in banks, meaning they are not performing. 54% of the total loan book. That's a crisis.
Where does this leave these banks? Because I'm looking at the growing loan book for a majority of these commercial banks then. What options do they have?
Theoretically, somebody will tell you this loan is unperforming, or we have a fallback, yes, let's auction it. But we are faced with a situation where there is nobody to buy. And this is why you remember my earlier comment that banks need to be more innovative in the way that they're doing things. The problem we are facing now is unique. It is not what we had 5, 10, 20 years ago. And until we come up with new measures to counter this, banks are going to face a huge problem. Now, I see this situation really becoming worse. Although, give it to Kenyans, we are very resilient. It's just a way we can come out of all this mess, and you'll find again things are back to normal in a space of 2 to 3 years. But that again will be by chance. We need everything to be deliberate. Banks must go back to the drawing board and ask the question, how do we support our customers that are in distress in a way that gives them sufficient room to find their foot again to start driving their businesses the right way.
Before we move away from matters banking, then is the option of risk-based interest, is that an option when it comes to our banking sector?
Well, but how do you compute risk-based interest? What parameters are you going to employ? For me, COVID has taught me that surprises will hit you from all directions. So how we used to assess risks for 5, 6, or let's say in fairness 12 months ago is not the same way we are going to to do it today. The question then becomes, what are the surprises coming and how do we mitigate it? So I find a lot of these measures to be a bit more theoretical. But I want to believe that COVID is teaching us to think differently on how we approach our business risk mechanisms, so that it can be a lot more broader based, and then people can foresee and mitigate some of the problems that we may face with pandemics such as COVID-19. But if you are telling me about risk-based, to some degree it could help, but I don't see it as the ultimate solution to the complications that we are facing.
What I'm hearing from you as far as the banking sector is concerned is that we need to adapt, then adopt.
Too traditional for our time. We must do exactly what you've said.
Good. Yeah. Now, as we come to a conclusion, Wanjiku is ever expectant when we have the budget being read. If you're given an opportunity to make this budget, we've already seen what the BPS has to offer. How would you go about it to make it more palatable for Wanjiku?
Yeah, I had some thinking around that, and a few things that I think should be a priority for all of us. One, if you really want to help Wanjiku, the biggest problem Wanjiku is facing right now are the side or after effects of the COVID malady. And until we can put Wanjiku at a place where her health is assured, we will continue to have a problem as a country. I think healthy, happy people produce more. So that for me would be a critical area of support. Wanjiku is running the small enterprises. Can we get an economic stimulus package that trickles down to that level? How do we incentivize Wanjiku so that production can be assured? That would be an issue for me for concern. And then, of course, there's been a lot of talk around women and youth. So targeting Wanjiku within that category, how can we fund them? I know we've had concepts in the past that I think have failed, but largely because the operationalization has not been properly thought through. So you dish out money to try and support a certain business concern or entity, but the aspect of collection, security, collateralization, etc., bringing accountability and responsibility to the people that we lend to, that has not been very well thought through. But I think the youth, and I think Wanjiku, covers a big chunk of the youth in this country and women. If we focus on that and come out with very, very special packages, we could be of help to Wanjiku. Of course, tax reliefs, and we've talked about that already. And then most important, if we can beat corruption and unethical practices, both in government and in the private sector, a lot of that can accrue as benefit to Wanjiku, directly or indirectly. So those are some of the things that I would quickly think of. Yeah.
Well, if you tuned in, we have been discussing matters of the economy with a focus on fiscal planning. Our guest this evening has been Dr. Julian Roa, who is the CEO of Schedules, who says if he was given an opportunity to be part of the people who are calling shots in as far as fiscal planning for the country is concerned, among the things that he would prioritize is the manufacturing sector with a keen focus on MSMEs, giving them an economic stimulus package that trickles down to them, as well as the health sector, given that we are riding the COVID-19 pandemic. Healthy people are happy people who produce more. You have been watching Business Insight. I'm Regina Manyara.
Thank you.